Well, good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's good to have you here. Welcome to the OxyMorons, and I'm very pleased to have one of my favorite OxyMorons with me, Mark Patrick. So welcome. Good to have you here.
Great to be here.
So for folks who haven't been on this before, this is a live broadcast. It's intentionally live so that it's somewhat unscripted, and we pledge that we will not have PowerPoint presentations or anything like that during the course of it. But the background of this series is that after a long time being in this business, we often say that success is 80% people, 15% process, 5% technology. Almost anybody that's been done a project can kind of do this like by heart. They could just recite that. But the reality is that we act as if the proportions are exactly reversed. We spend all this time talking about technology. We spend a little bit of time talking about process, and we hardly ever talk about the people. So what this show is about is it's not about the multiple layers of technology stacks, all those beautiful PowerPoint presentations, and how those stacks miraculously connect somehow. And it's not about those lovely workflow charts with all those triangles and circles and squares and diagrams and stuff. But what it's about is that I find that often most people fall into one of two camps, and those who endlessly dream but never actually implement, and those who work on a perpetual set of never quite perfect enough detailed plans. And the people that really change things, which is why Mark's here, are, and this is, I find it true at work, in communities, and all sorts of places, are the people that I call them oxymorons. And if you want another term for that, it's the practical dreamers or the visionary pragmatists. It's the people that combine those two things, combine vision and tactics, combine strategy and objectives. And so that's what this whole thing is all about. And so those of you that are watching, you have the opportunity to post comments. Please don't hesitate to post comments. You also have the opportunity to share this with other folks. I will say that I noticed from doing this the first time is that Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live, and what is the other one? Twitter Live are not necessarily all on exactly the same syncing pattern. And so some of you may be viewing this at slightly different times, but please don't hesitate to voice comments. Please don't hesitate to share it. And so without further ado, let me hop in and start the conversation with Mark here. So as I said, one of the reasons that Mark is on the show is that I've known him a long time. He is a true oxymoron, but the thing that's always impressed me most about you, Mark, is you operate in a really unusual business environment. You operate in an environment in which you have highly all sorts of structure, obviously being in a military environment. You operate at enormous scale because you're dealing with people, all over the place, all around the world. And you operate in an environment in which you've got to execute, but you also got to convince people on the vision. And, so tell people a little bit about, first of all, where you work and what you do, and, without getting yourself in trouble in the process.
Well, so for about 13 years, I've been working on the Joint Staff. Some people know what that is, but it's essentially the staff for the senior military member of the armed forces, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is the president's military advisor and the secretary of Defense's military advisor. So he is sort of expected to provide best military advice in all circumstances. So the staff that supports him is, let's say a couple thousand plus, not all in the same location. And they are divided up into directorates, and so that they advise within their areas of responsibility and experience. The staff is, as you said, it's military, partially civilian, and then there's plenty of contract support there across those directorates. So, I operate in a part of the staff called the Directorate of Management, which has the Secretariat, which is where I am, where tasks are received and then sort of passed out to the staff. And then I'm responsible in the Information Management Division with records and information management for the staff, as well as overseeing the records and information management programs of the 11 combatant commands, now that we have Space Command. So you have like European Command and Central Command and all those joint commands. They either have an area of the globe they're responsible for, or they have a mission like Transportation Command or Special Operations Command. And so they all have programs, and our policies govern them. I also have the kind of declassification programs like the Freedom of Information Act and some other declassification programs. We do the policy documents for the staff. We maintain that, forms, NATO, and then we run a little research service that I call Ask a Researcher, that where we help the action officers who get these homework assignments to draft the product for the chairman in response to Congress or the Secretary of Defense. We sort of plug them into the corporate memory of the organization, since we maintain that, and give them sort of a quick boost to say, hey, do you have past examples of this thing that's happening now that we need to revisit? And so we try to scurry and get those things all together and get those to the action officer so that they can get those draft products done at a high level of academic rigor, but quickly, and then also ensuring that there's historical consistency through the years, because the Joint Staff has been around since World War II, and some of these issues come and go through the years, and you want to make if you're going to depart from a historical precedent, you want to do it deliberately based upon study and logic, and not just randomly because you're the person that has to deal with that question this go around. So that's a bit of it. I'm leading a project to go for the fourth instantiation of a new task system and a record system that we're going to do as a managed service with the Department of the Army. Actually, they're going to be the provider for it. So I'm looking forward to that, because I'm sort of managing the existing service, and I'd like to get out of that role and sort of subscribe to someone else who's doing it. So that's sort of sucking all of my oxygen these days, that project.
So clearly a low stakes environment, no second guessing or anything that goes on that it's of any consequence. So when you're not doing that, just to get people a chance to know you a bit, what's been your favorite COVID TV binge watch? And anybody out there can also comment on theirs as well. We welcome those perspectives.
Well, I have to say, my binge watching is influenced by who I'm hanging out with. So my wife and I like This Is Us. My son was really into The Mandalorian, so we're all up to speed on those episodes. I don't think that we did anything special COVID-wise, because have a propensity to want to get outside and not be cooped up, during this time, because that's what keeps me sane instead of just being in the telework environment or even at the Pentagon. It's just, I need to get outside.
So when people got peered into your Spotify playlist or whatever you use to play music, what's the most surprising thing they would find there?
I think they would be just weirded out by my Spotify activity. I'm a music guy, right? So I've played guitar for years. All my kids play instruments. So I think I'm a child of the 70s. So you would see all the usual stuff there. No surprise. There's a lot of international music there. I think during COVID, my playlist has been very mellow. It's been like, a thing to relax. But my daughter did a semester abroad in Lyon, France, and I studied French. So you would find a bunch of French sort of cafe music. She took a trip to Portugal. So we started talking about fado music and fado, traditional Portuguese music. That's all on my playlist. Then my eldest daughter's boyfriend is Italian and Cuban. And so we were talking about bossa nova. So you'll find a bunch of bossa nova. So But so the surprising song that you might find, or this earworm of a song that was on one of my French playlists. It's a guy from 1966 album. His name is Jacques Dutronc, and the song is called Les Cactus. It is a Friday afternoon song, so I commend it to you if you like.
Oh my gosh! Wow, I have to find that. That's
Les Cactus, Jacques Dutronc. So it's from 1966. So that's, people would see that and be like, "What is this guy up to?" So
actually, Angela has a great interest in accessing your Spotify. So yeah, it's actually, we have the same problem in Spotify and also on Amazon, in that because we're cheap, a lot of the family members share the same account. And so like I'll get these recommendations that are just this totally odd hodgepodge of stuff that don't even really make much sense in terms of like what is all this stuff? But
I can usually tell where the influences come. Our kids on Netflix or so yeah, it's like, why is that in my feed?
All right, last question before we hop into my oxymoron questions. Favorite book over the past 12 months?
I won't say favorites. Well, I'll give you my couple business books from a recommendation as I was sort of contemplating, maybe a life after the federal government. A friend recommended the Challenger sale and the Gap sale, which I read both of those cover to cover and marked them up. And I found myself adding to what I had learned from AIM through the years about the importance of marketing ideas from the various kind of marketing experts that have been speakers at conferences and things. And I thought, okay, this is helpful to me if I consider, moving into something where I might be doing sales. But it also was just great at the human nature level of selling ideas within your organization. And I found it very valuable, and I'm still, processing that. So that's the business book. The personal book I'll throw out there was a random find. I was visiting my oldest daughter who just moved to Annapolis, and I was walking through the streets, and they had one of those little on the street libraries, it was kind of shaped like a boat because it was Annapolis. And my youngest daughter opened it up, and my eyes caught this book called Clapton's Guitar, paperback. I said, I'll see that. And I pulled that out, written in 2006, about this guy named Wayne Henderson, who is actually a luthier from, he's got a shop in Rugby, Virginia, which is probably 25 minutes from here. And he's been around forever. And I was like, why have I never heard of this guy? So then you'll find like him and Doc Watson and a lot of the Appalachian style music in my Spotify playlist. But I'm reading that as my Metro read, and I am determined to go visit him at his shop as soon as I can figure that out over the next months, maybe this summer, if I can connect with him. So Clapton's Guitar, highly recommend for any guitar enthusiast.
That sounds terrific. Yeah, I like that idea. So, okay. A couple of questions here just to tee up our conversation. First of all, give people an idea of where your best ideas come from. How do you maintain a creative edge, particularly working in an environment, that's kind of doubly bureaucratic, both the federal government and the defense industry. How do you maintain that edge?
So I think it is a combination of my experience and then all of the engagements that I have with even some of the people that are in the chat here, like Tony Pileska. Great to see you there. Angela, who we were having some social media back and forth this morning. So it's having a broad network of diverse, talented folks, especially in areas that I know I have a gap, and socializing. It's just a constant conversation. And then really just you have to have some white space in there, some kind of way to process it, right? Because these ideas are iterative. They start as something sort of nutty, and then you kind of talk about it, and then you're like, oh, I know somebody that's done that before, and you sort of germinate it and talk about it, and that's kind of how it happens. But lately, I think the white space is the toughest, because I find I need that to get the creative side of me going, and that's some of the reasons my hobbies are creative, because it helps. It just gets you out of the grind of sort of office life.
Yeah, get your mind kind of on a whole different plane, different kinds of problems. Yeah. So if folks have questions, by the way, I put up a little banner there. If you have a question, please feel free to just post it as a comment, then we'll get it, and we'll try to address it, of course, along the way. And thanks for the shout out to Angela and Tony. I'm sure they appreciated that. So second question I wanted to ask you is, okay, you've come up with a great idea. You think it's a great idea. You haven't told anybody yet. How do you validate? How do you go to the next step?
Well, I mean, if it's not original, I'm looking around to see if anybody's tried it before, in an environment similar to mine and how their experience was. They're the first folks that I want. If I can't find that, I'm going to try to pilot it small and scale it if it works, kind of thing. So that's not some big revelation. There is a guy named David Bray. You can find him on social media. When I met him, he was the CIO at the FAA, and he used to talk in his talks about basically creating a safe space for your folks to fail in, to have a sandbox where you can try new ideas, because if you're going to be innovative, you have to be able to fail. So you have to have that environment. And that's one of the challenging things in the DoD environment. There's sort of not a big appetite for any kind of failure, and that makes it tough. You have to create that. And so otherwise you just have to be, perfect all the time. It's never going to work. So, anyway, so I think small and scale, iterate, collaborate, ask other people as you start to, what do you think about this? This seems good to me. So there's always that collaborative side in my mind where I know as I've gotten older, I know where I think I'm pretty good and where I have gaps, and I try to get people to fill those gaps and say, from a marketing perspective, or how do you think this persona will accept this? Because of the people piece, right? You're going to have to not just have a good technical idea, but it's going to have to sell to multiple people. And so anyway, it's a collaborative thing, iterative thing, but at some point, definitely you just got to go. You got to take the leap.
And I think that question of failing and failing fast that you mentioned, and having a safe zone to fail is a hard thing in our space, that we've done, because traditionally so many of those projects have been so over-engineered and so gigantic, and so waterfall in nature that the stakes of failing become gigantic. They're not just tactical mistakes; they're really strategic mistakes. So I think I think that question of a safe zone is and being able to break things down into smaller increments so that you can so you have that space to
I think it's an obligation of leaders in the space to ensure that they're smart people that they're working with have that space, and that they know, like you got to make them fearless by encouraging them that, if you fall, it's going to be okay.
You've come up with a fabulous idea. You validated it through collaborative mechanisms and testing it out in different test beds and that kind of thing. And you start to pursue it, and inevitably you come up against obstacles. So who or what really pisses you off when you start to go after an idea? And you don't have to use people's names.
Well, I'll use somebody's name in a good way, but so I think this to me gets back to where I feel like I have the big picture, and I understand how this detail is a part of the big picture. And the audience that I'm talking to, whoever they might be, they just don't get it, right? They don't understand why I'm placing so much importance on this thing that seems ancillary or something. And to me, it's all connected to this larger whole. And this goes back to a conversation I had early on around the board table with Paul Engel. And we were talking about something that was along these lines. And he said to me, Mark, you have cognitive complexity. I'm like, what? And he said, it was basically like this ability to connect the dots. So we had this ongoing conversation through the years about this concept of cognitive complexity, a person's ability to sort of put all the skill sets and things together to do this holistic, strategic outcome. And I kind of was like, is it trainable? And I remember coming back to a conference a couple of years after our initial conference that we were talking about that. And I said, I think that you can train this into people. And Paul, like, no equivocation, he's like, nope, you either got it or you don't. I'm like, oh man, you're discouraging me, because I really feel like if you're going to do great things, you need to have that cognitive complexity to see how records management and knowledge management and data analytics and IT and how all these things work together, that you're achieving, in our case, a best military advice product for our senior decision maker. Because I think ultimately that's what we're trying to do. Best, fastest, rigorous, historically consistent. And it depends upon some aspect of all of these other skill sets, and they don't always play well together, So when I'm interacting with somebody and I've got the orchestra in my mind, all the pieces, and somebody is just like drilling in on, one piece, and that they just can't get past it, or they don't understand how it connects. I mean, that's what is like, and I just picture Paul going, they don't have cognitive complexity.
Well, it's it probably paybacks is Kentucky didn't make the tournament this year. I don't think so. So anyway, he's a Kentucky fan. I think about one of those conversations too, and your point's really interesting about like when you have all the ideas of kind of how all the cogs fit together, and you kind of, there's this and there's this and there's this and there's this and there's this. And I remember I used to try to, early on in my AIM experience, I was making a presentation about something, I don't know what it was that I wanted to do. And I had all those cogs and wheels in my head and was trying to put them all onto slides. And I remember John O'Connell, who was the CEO of Staffware at the time, workflow company a long time ago. He just looked at me and he said, fewer notes, Beethoven, fewer notes. And so I had to think about that in terms of, you don't necessarily have to play the whole symphony, when you're getting started with something. But anyway, how much do you worry about failing?
Obviously, I mean, as a military guy, you grew up dreading failure, but being motivated by it. It's what gets you up in the morning to, prepare attention to detail so that you don't overlook something at a critical moment. It goes back to learn how to fly, but it's healthy if it's managed. You just can't be paralyzed by it. That's the thing. You have to mitigate the risk. You can't be foolhardy. But I think for me, a sense of adventure, which makes me want to do something that's challenging, whether it's public speaking or performing music in front of a crowd. There's always an element of the excitement of that, the adventure of that. So I think I use that for my creativity, and I also use it because there's a certain adrenaline rush when you take a managed risk, and then things go well or good enough, and the more that you do that, the more you're like, I can do this, and you develop confidence. So there's always that fear. I mean, you would be crazy to be fearless, or to be foolhardy, and I can't imagine anybody. So I have like Colin Powell's rules on my desk, his 13 rules, and one of them is don't give countenance to your naysayers or your fears or something like that. And I was like, that's a great piece of advice. And then I also have the Teddy Roosevelt little speech on the man in the arena. You gotta, those are the things that, I mean, that one stuck with me through the years, is that it's better to fall on your face, making a mistake. And, if it means a big career change for you, at least you went down, throwing punches. So,
that I think that's a really interesting comment, that notion of like, let's see, how would you say, like embracing the fear and kind of like, and I've thought about this and a couple of weeks ago, I was on a similar live thing like this with Glenn Gibson, who's from Highland, and Glenn just released a book on making presentations. It's called Before the Mic. And Glenn, if you're still with us, put the link up and I'll post it for folks. But at some point you were talking about the book and about the dynamics of a great presentation and all that kind of stuff. And in the process, you said people would ask you whether you were scared, whether you had an element of fear before any presentation, despite the fact of having made like a gazillion presentations. And I thought about that because people have asked me that too, after all this AIM stuff and all this stuff over the years. And hell, even doing a weird live podcast broadcast thing, without a net. And the answer is that, everything has a little bit of an edge to it. You kind of think to yourself, oh my gosh, suppose this goes wrong. But if you don't do it, it's just so stale. Right. Everything gets so old. And so anyway, that's I think embrace the fear might be something that I take away from what you said. And I think in your environment, coming from a military environment, I mean, you've had background that's real fear.
I've gone through real fear a lot.
Like not standing up before a crowd, but real fear.
And I've had plenty of failures that I've recovered from. So yeah.
All right, last question, and then we'll start to wrap up. Is what do you consider to be your secret sauce?
So this is a shout out to Angela, because it's funny. I saw you ask this question from to Atla, and there's this whole running thread in social media about the hatred of that term secret sauce. And so I started laughing, and so I put out there, hey, I think this is going to come up. So anyway, but seriously, I think it is resilience. Because we talked about this. I think it's a combination of resilience, a desire to have some adventure, to take a few, risks, not foolhardy risks. But I saw a Air Force general speak once, and she was basically talking about this concept. And she says, you just have to get up one more time, then you fall down. You fall down 7 times, get up 8. And I think that is really it, because if you look at any of the great achievers, pick the field, you usually hear about them and their great success, but it's the whole like Edison and Einstein thing or whatever. It's like, it's all the mistakes that you made to get to that final thing. And so I think it's just resilience, just get back up again. What did you learn? Get over it. And I guess the last piece would just be like constantly be trying to put your ego aside, constantly be trying to put your ego aside, because we're all humans. We all have them. The people that work for you have them. And, they don't expect you to be a genius. They expect you to try to become one. You need to be who they need you to be, and there's this like, be who you are, but your people need you to be something based upon, the enterprise you're engaged in. And so you have to figure that out, embrace, if you're an introvert or whatever your challenges are, you're not the creative one. So you have to hire them, and know I need this guy in the team. So a combination of those things, but resilience to me is probably the most important thing. Don't quit.
Yeah, I think often about the Malcolm Gladwell conversation about doing something 10,000 times,
Right.
And not necessarily that we all have 10,000 times to do something, but this idea that a success comes at the end of a long tail of stuff that people don't see, that's kind of beneath the surface, and so I think that's really an important, that notion of resilience in the face of that, I think, is really important. So thank you very much for the time. Thanks to all the folks that were listening. Feel free to share this to the network, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with a guest that I will announce shortly. And this has been a blast. I learned a lot from you, Mark, and thanks so much. And thanks for everyone.
It's been an honor.
Each other a long time.
Thank you.
Take care.